where they have all these. Henry, you missed all my good. They have all kinds of great interactive like visual things. So this week, the visual was where our Super Bowl roster is from, and at every state, who was born in every state. So that's where I got that. Okay, next up, Wisconsin girls high school sports. Talk with your table. You can't participate there. You know the answer. What 5 sports have the most participants in Wisconsin? See if you can take 1 minute and get the order in 1 to 5. What's the most participants down to the 5th? See if your table can get it.
Come on, girls.
Most numbers, raw numbers. How many players? Oh, got it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, you have 30 more seconds. It's a quick exercise. All right. Okay, we're ready. Gotta give me your, you guys look like you finished quickly. Can you give me your top 5 in order?
Sure, we said volleyball, basketball, soccer, track and field, softball.
Okay, all right. What did you guys say? What did you guys say? What's your?
We did volleyball, cross country, and track. It's 2, and it's a combo.
Okay.
Soccer, basketball, and then softball.
Okay. Is that any different?
We had volleyball, soccer, track and cross country, then basketball and swimming.
Oh, you're swimming in there. Okay. All right. Let's look at the answers here. Let's see. Volleyball's 1. Track and field is 2. Big numbers in track, you know. Did anybody have track too?
Yeah.
You did? You did?
Yeah.
Basketball is the most participative sport in America. And in terms of, when you look at the whole population, who plays any sport the most, just play it. Basketball more than any other sport. Why? Because there's, driveway hoops. You go out in your cousin's driveway one afternoon and you're marked as a participant. That's one measure of it. So basketball is the most participative sport in America, but we'll find out more about that in a little bit. Next up in Wisconsin, football. 4th, and then we go to soccer.
How far down the street?
You'll see here in a minute. Okay, so we're gonna talk about some of this stuff today a little more. We're really focusing on volleyball, but we're gonna talk about it in relation to some other sports. There's been so much, I think we need more Caitlin Clark attention because she doesn't get enough attention these days. There was an article about her a couple days ago in the New York Times, just all about her and all the great things she's doing. And one of the narratives that often is told alongside Caitlin Clark is about the women's basketball game and how it's never been in better shape, and how there's this, we see like in the NCAA tournament, we'll see coming up in the Big Ten tournament, there'll be huge crowds to watch her. There'll be huge crowds to watch some other teams like South Carolina, probably UConn, LSU, a couple of those teams. So there's this like high level talent and lots of visibility for certain players. Now, we're going to learn today about if that's the real story of the game, if women's basketball actually is in really great shape, or what might be some other parts of that story. This is, you don't need to read that. It's just a broad visual. This will tell you the other side of the Caitlin Clark story, which is that what that is a percentage change in girls' high school basketball participation by state in the United States over the last 10 years. All the states on the left have lost participation in girls' basketball. So the longer the bars are going to the left, the bigger percentage drop in girls' basketball. High school, girls who play on their high school teams, to be clear. This is not like club basketball. This is like number of girls on playing high school basketball. So take a look at some of those, especially the extreme examples on the left. And only 5 states have had growth in girls basketball for the last 10 years. So that would indicate to us right away that below the top level stardom that we have of some of these spectacular players right now in women's basketball, there's a huge kind of decreasing of the game in terms of participation at the high school level. This gives you a little more detail into some of that. 5 states, the largest and increases and decreases in girls' basketball in those recent years. Texas is the most interesting state. Anybody from Texas here? No? Oh, we got one, of course. Landry is from Dallas, and he has done some of this research with us. We'll show some of the research that he's done. Texas is going to be a really interesting state for all of us to watch here in these next 5 years in a lot of sports, but especially in volleyball. And in our next BIOS session, you'll learn also in football. But it's interesting to see Texas at the top of the decrease. Girls are leaving basketball in Texas in droves. We'll see how significantly they're leaving it. And this is almost a 40% decrease as the population of the state has gone up like 20% or something like that. I have the exact numbers later on. So the numbers of people, they're actually gaining hundreds of thousands of residents, or they're losing in basketball. The story of volleyball, we see our great team, of course, and many other really great teams similar to women's basketball, these amazing stories of success. But those stories are not just at the college level. We're seeing teams like right down the road, DSHA High School. This is a picture of them in the state championship. One of their coach, Katie, has spent time with us, visiting with us about her team and what they do. They're this success story that is pretty remarkable. And there are a lot of schools like this and a lot of clubs like this around the country that are indicative of the shape of girls volleyball at the high school level, at the club level, and kind of even before it gets to high school. So we'll talk more about some of these types of trends a bit today. So before I get into that, this is BIOS. We talk about research and bringing research and sport together. For this particular study, we've been trying to bring together all of these different data sources. So each of them is interesting in their own right. NFHS is something we refer to a lot in some of our stuff here in the past. That's the National Federation of High Schools. And so if you think of like in Wisconsin, we have the WIAA, which is like our high school sport association. Every state has its own version of that. Where I grew up in Indiana, it was IHSAA. What is it in Illinois? Same. IHSAA. We all have our associations. The NFHS is like the umbrella group, and every year they collect data from every state to get these numbers on. So the people at Wisconsin every year will share all their participation. It comes from athletic directors at each school to their state and then on up to the federal level. So we've analyzed all those data, but then also looked at those in conjunction with all these other. SFIA, there's a lot of acronyms today, is the Sports Fitness Industry Association. This is interesting data that's super protected. They make you pay a lot for their research. And they do industry research. So they give their research to like big corporations like a Dick's Sporting Goods or other like massive corporations. So they know kind of what's in the pipeline, what to produce, how to do it. And they do annual massive surveys across the country with huge numbers to learn about those trends. So we did draw from some of that. National Center for Education and Statistics, looking at what's going on in all of our schools in the country, the U.S. Census, NCAA research, and then we've also been going around. We just got back earlier this week from California. I'm doing some research there with some of these superpowers. There are these schools we're calling factories, which are schools that are producing huge numbers of athletes through a lot of our colleges. So we've done a lot of focus groups and interviews as well. That's where a lot of this is coming from today. Let's get a little more background on some of these data, though, as we get into some of the questions. So what we're sharing today are some numbers, like what are some of these trends, especially folks in volleyball and basketball, and then 5 hypotheses as to why it's happening. And that's where we're gonna get your opinions as well, agree or disagree. Okay, so here's some of the numbers we just saw. Somebody asked about the next sports down. So we see, let's see, some decreases in cross country, increases a bit in some of those colors are a little hard to see, but golf is going up a bit. Girls tennis is going up a little. This is another way to visualize. This is in the state of Wisconsin high school girls sports. Fastest growing on the right. So golf has had a lot of growth, but the thing that's a little bit, it's taking context is those numbers are still a lot lower. So golf has 20% growth, but they're still, as you saw on the previous chart, one of the lower numbers of participation. Girls leaving kind of quickly in some of these sports. I was surprised, Morgan, to see softball. I'm not sure why. I would like to ask you. I don't know, maybe you could.
Not out in the community enough, not hyping it up.
Not giving it up enough. It's interesting to see some of these trends, though, to see this is in our state. For context, these are boys sports, just briefly. At our next seminar, we're going more into some of this stuff. What's growing, what's not? Some pretty jarring stuff for us to learn about football in our state and some other states here coming up in terms of numbers of boys playing it and numbers of boys not playing it anymore. We just give you a preview of our next seminar. And about 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, 2003, there were 32,000 boys playing football in Wisconsin. Today, about 20,000. So we lost a third of Wisconsin high school football players. And not, you know, since Jonas been born, that's happened. So.
You don't have boys volleyball, there's that, might have been on the ticket.
Yeah, these were the highest numbers. So boys volleyball is actually growing rapidly, but still very low relative to all the others. But let's look at so the starting point for this, which is I thought interesting, and I'll kind of whiz through these, but what we're going to look at is a series of charts from all the Big Ten states. So all the states that have Big Ten institutions, what's going on with high school volleyball and high school basketball for girls. Keep in mind, this is school-based participation, not club. This is California. Volleyball on top, basketball tanking. Pennsylvania is the one state where we see basketball still way above volleyball. It's the only one. We spoke with our coaches the other day about this, and they were not surprised by this.
What's the hinge at the 2017, 2018?
These are just point in time data points.
Why does it seem like everything ticks either up or down right at that spot?
It doesn't necessarily, like if we were to look, we could get all of these years, you know, and so most of these end up being somewhat straight. Like if we just got a 5 year, I'm just showing you 5 year intervals. If I showed you every year in there, some of these lines go a little more like that.
What did our coaches say about Pennsylvania?
Then it's historically, it's interesting because Penn State is a strong volleyball school, but historically, the Philadelphia, which is a major population region, is a massive basketball community. And then what was the other reason? That was one. Traditionally, historically, one of the things we'll see here is the champions of games in different states. So our coaches are huge champions of the game. They promote the game. They build the game. They go have purposeful efforts to do that. We had some insights about like the historic kind of leaders of Penn State volleyball weren't committed to that. It wasn't part of what they did, not for good or for bad. It wasn't. You know about this?
I mean, we know the coverage, yeah.
You heard this? Okay. So I don't know enough to get personal about it at all, but that's part of the story.
Yeah.
So there's the basketball history, Philadelphia being one of the biggest basketball cities in America, for boys and girls, and then that's part of it. The other general thing we'll say is that we'll see volleyball strength has traditionally been the upper Midwest, and the East Coast has not traditionally been, in terms of volleyball numbers, very good. We'll see some changes though. So that's part of what we're looking at. This is, sorry, my thing is up there, Illinois. The Hoosier State, which is very disappointing for me to see the sport of basketball dying, even in Indiana, which is again, it's the heart of basketball, and we see girls flocking out of basketball. Iowa, looks like the Caitlin Clark effect. Will we see a bump here? We sure have not yet. It's basketball is dying quickly in Iowa. Girls participation. Whoops, I may have just skipped one there. Maryland, Michigan, seeing a similar story in most of these places. Minnesota. Another trend you'll see here is that a general trend that is not a good one, which is girls' participation in high school sports across the board is going down. And it's a little bit surprising finding. Some of it was explained by COVID-19. We saw both boys and girls dip just because of a lot of teams stopped playing in that. But boys have immediately rebounded, girls have not. And there were some trends right before 2020, like starting 2017 was the first year the numbers started. They had been a steady increase. 2017 was the first year they started going down. Then they went really quickly down in 2021. Boys have bounced right back up, girls have not. So it's a concerning trend that we need to think about in terms of getting girls involved with their high school teams.
Pete, I know you said this is all just high school data, it doesn't include clubs.
Yeah.
Do you suppose that club numbers are going up as high school numbers are going up?
Girls club volleyball numbers are going up,
So maybe the.
not girls basketball. We do not have indication that, we have more indication that girls are leaving basketball, not just leaving high school basketball for club basketball. The girls volleyball numbers, if you'll notice, some of them, like, they're not necessarily, Scott, that they've gone down 2% in Minnesota. They've gone actually a little bit down in a lot of states. And while that's happening, we know the club is exploding. So some high school numbers are down for girls, but we know that that's not the whole picture, which is for basketball. We think that it's girls leading the game. Nebraska, of traditional volleyball power, still the numbers of girls playing volleyball, you'd think it would be higher in that state where they have so much visibility for volleyball. So New Jersey, look at that fascinating explosion of volleyball in New Jersey. 43% growth in the game of volleyball in New Jersey in 10 years, which is almost unfathomable to have that kind of an increase. So what this is the first indicator of, I've seen a couple other states, is that whereas traditionally volleyball has been an upper Midwest stronghold, but you still see that like in our Big Ten strength, that we have so many of the best teams in the country, some of the best high school players. We're seeing a dispersion of participation talent in some areas, most noteworthy in the South, but there are a couple pockets in the East as well, where volleyball is growing. Ohio is interesting, and we actually, Kelly put us in touch with the director, Jamie, the director of the American Volleyball Coaches Association. And we looked at these numbers and he was surprised by these. So these are the numbers that are in NFHS, but we're perplexed by the Ohio numbers as to why the volleyball numbers will be going down so quickly as they are. Actually, in Ohio, it's interesting to see that even football, which you think of Ohio as such a football state, the football numbers are going down too. So there's something happening in Ohio where kids are playing less sports.
I'm just wondering, is this people leaving, like, are there young people staying in these states that you're thinking of? Like, I see Ohio not being a place where people stay and keep their families.
Yeah,
I just like, is that
great.
part of it?
That's actually a great, we have done all the census data
Yeah.
on number of kids in high school and number of, and the population trends in these schools. So that's a huge point that you're making, which is in our next presentation. It's not today, but I'll give you a preview. All of our Big Ten states have if you look at the population trends over 10 years, it's within 2% plus or minus.
Yeah.
So like little gains, little losses, little gains, little losses. So Ohio has not had a huge loss in population, but slight loss. The SEC states average growth of over 10% per state, including explosion in Texas and Florida. Millions of people moving to Texas and Florida, which so we have proportional data. We have a little bit here, but where we looked at the total number of high school kids in these states and in these schools, and the number of participants to look at what proportion of kids are playing. Because one thing to see the numbers of kids in Ohio is to see what proportion of kids are playing. So we have a little bit of that. It is a big thing to consider. Okay, I think I accidentally have Pennsylvania twice. Washington, a new Big Ten school. There's Wisconsin. So volleyball has grown in the last 5 years in Wisconsin. Basketball continues to go down quickly. If any of you have, Tracy and I were talking about hoops all the time, and if you're around like high school basketball and boys and girls, you can see it visually. You can see smaller benches in high school, both in club and in school basketball for girls. Some schools, our daughter's team played Wisconsin Dells about a month ago. And they had a JV team with 5 girls on the JV team. And then the varsity came out and started warming up with only 4 girls, and they took 3 of the girls from JV and they dressed with the varsity. So they had a total of, I think 7 girls dressed with the varsity team. So that's like a little bit of extreme, but not that much. There are a lot of schools with very small rosters, which is very interesting. It's not a tiny school. It's not a huge school, but it's not a tiny school. This is all that stuff in one picture. You're getting more charts and numbers you want to see, but the volleyball changes here, basketball changes there. Okay, let's just look at a couple other states and then we'll start asking why. Alabama, so volleyball is growing in the South. Show you a couple of southern states. Notice both Alabama and Arkansas, both sports went up. Girls' sports participation is going up in the South at rates. It's a good thing. We also see, you think about who is living in these states, it's very different demographics. So there's a lot of good stories in the South about kids playing a more diverse representation of kids in different sports, in basketball and volleyball and other sports. So a lot of that we see in Alabama, Arkansas, Texas, different spots. Georgia, it's interesting, I never think of Georgia as having a really big population. It's got a bigger population than all but 3 Big Ten states. So there's a lot of people in Georgia. This is the most interesting state of all, Texas. And the main reason is just to look at the sheer numbers. 10 years ago, over 60,000 girls were playing basketball. And now we're down just about, actually close to 40 at this point. So they're leaving quickly, and volleyball is exploding, and we'll look at a little more there. Landry did a kind of a case study on the game of volleyball in the state, including both schools and clubs. And we had good conversation with our coaches here, with some other coaches around, like what's going on in Texas. So some of the stuff that we dug up and where Landry found talks just about the strength of the game of volleyball coming up in Texas right now. It's something to really keep your eye on. Because not only the numbers going up, but the number of club teams and the number of elite players in that state are kind of overshadowing all other states at this point. This is some of the stuff. You found about it from various sources in volleyball. If you want to say anything about this stuff, this is a lot, but if you looked at the previous slide, it said that in the state of Texas, like their club basketball right now, there are very few teams, a couple of top teams, not many at all, but this is at every level of club volleyball. What Landry found.
They pretty much dominated the top 10 rankings, national rankings in every age group. Most of them, as you see, have top 1 or 2 teams. There was these 2 or 3 main clubs that had all the teams in all these age groups that are producing these elite volleyball athletes.
I don't know if you know this, but are a lot of Texas high schools like pay-for-play programs? So I know for volleyball specifically, like it can be very discouraging if you have people who are playing year-round club and then it's pay-for-play in your high school, or they just become way more selective even in high school, that it becomes less accessible. Is that like a feature of?
Well, I will give you my best answer and then, but it's probably limited. So these numbers are these are club numbers here. So these are pay-per-play teams, clubs, the private clubs, but at the high school level, there's not a difference in Texas versus the other states in terms of access to sport. There's usually a participation fee, but it's not necessarily different from anything else. The other thing we'll see with the Texas population and later is that it's not just they're gaining kind of random population, they're getting what we call choice moves. I mean, people are choosing to move there, people with means are moving there, and the places they're going are what we call super communities, meaning if you think of there's like, if you look at it on the census.gov, they're like urban, suburban, and then super urban, like it's the areas that are like right at the outskirts of the suburbs. They're spreading out, super sprawling. And so a lot of these communities in Texas, if you look at where they're being built, they're building these massive sports complexes, which I'm sure you know a lot of them, Landry, a lot of you have been to Texas, I've seen a lot of them. And these are places like, you know, Arrowhead High School ×5, you know, they have all the resources, they have all the top, everything that the kids need in sport. So it's not only that they're getting the numbers, but they're getting they're getting all the resources as well, the kids who are going there. So what we'd expect from this is that, the numbers we're seeing will only escalate, they'll only, get bigger than the numbers of kids at top level.
There's two professional volleyball leagues that are kind of emerging this year and next year. And between the two leagues, there's 3 professional teams in Texas, one in Dallas, Austin, Houston, that will be starting next year in 2025. And there's only, between these two leagues, there's only about 12, 15 teams total. And 3 of them are in the state of Texas. And a lot of them are partnerships with these clubs already to help develop these programs and tournaments in the state.
So we did some proportional stuff. Some of this is take it for what it is. And these are, some of these are kind of estimates. So where we took National Center for Education Statistics, look at how many kids are in these schools, boys and girls, and what proportion of them. So like in the state of Iowa, there's 77,145 high school girls, just all across the board. How many are playing volleyball? So it's like this huge number proportionally in Iowa are playing volleyball. Wisconsin is number 2 in all the states. So that we call that like a sport density, meaning that like there's a huge portion of girls in our state right now playing volleyball, which is a really interesting and great thing. You see much different numbers in some of the other states. The numbers in the South are going up quickly. They're proportional numbers. If you were to look, I don't have these over time here, but it's not just the raw numbers, but the proportional numbers again, they're getting higher sport density in those states as well. Just a couple of things. We looked at some of the NCAA data as well. These are really interesting. So some of these things have been happening over years, and we're starting to see it at the college level. See if this resonates with any of you who are in the game right now. In Division I FBS, that would be like Power 5, that would be like the big conferences. Women's volleyball, there was a 70.6% increase in the number of Black female players over the last 10 years. Same level of women's basketball has been almost a 9% decrease in Black female players. So that speaks for itself. It's a really remarkable trend in Power 5 volleyball right now over the last 10 years, and basketball. In Division I, that's all Division I, so that would include other Division I schools, not just Power 5. Similarly, huge increase, not as big, but huge increase in Black female players, and a 16.6% decrease of Black female players in basketball. So what we can infer from these data and just learn from these data is that along with the geographic changes of who's playing, it's not just like raw, it's not even changes. We see a much greater participation rates among Black girls playing volleyball at the high school club level and now at the NCAA college level. So that's all a really good thing. You have to ask, well, why are those numbers so different in basketball? Some of it's somewhat easy, it's choice. And if you have the same girls choosing one or the other, there was a lot, there's some really noteworthy players over the last couple of years in women's volleyball who chose volleyball over basketball. These are those numbers. Number of Black female volleyball players in D1, FBS women's volleyball, just a line chart. The other one. Okay, so what does all this mean? That's lots of numbers. Sorry that it's probably numbed everybody after lunch here on a Friday afternoon. But volleyball is winning the head-to-head battle with basketball. We call it a head-to-head battle. You'll see why in a minute. Why are we just talking about volleyball and basketball? We'll talk about it in a minute. What we see in volleyball is like this top, when I say top talent, like all of it are great players here and these other great Big Ten and other institutions, amazing talent, never been better. But underneath it, we see a really robust base of volleyball. It's a very strong game right now from the from before high school through college, very strong. We see women's basketball, we'll see a certain story in these weeks ahead, we'll see a lot about women's basketball, the great stars with Caitlin and all the others. But there's a lot of room for concern about just the health of the game right now. So we need to understand these things better. So we have been testing these hypotheses with coaches around. We sat down with our UW coaches here last week or a couple weeks ago, and we tested all these and we got shot down on some ideas and we got support on others and we got more depth, and we've been talking to coaches around the country about some of these hypotheses. So here are some of our, and we'd like you to challenge these as well. These are all open to interpretation, but these are our 5 hypotheses as to why it's happening. And we're saying these not as like one is the reason and the other is not the reason. These are what we call coexistent and compounding, meaning they're all at play. They're all at play at the same time. And in fact, they compound each other in some ways. They gain momentum and snowball off each other. So first, say our first hypothesis, growth hypothesis 1, momentum. A lot of text on there. Not how you're supposed to have a PowerPoint slide, but we read every 4 years about like sports getting what they call an Olympic bump, meaning you remember like when the Winter Olympics and where you're back curling, there's all these people start doing curling all of a sudden, or you get that every 4 years with certain kind of niche sports. That is a real thing. So that really does affect participation. But volleyball right now has not only things like these great teams like the Wisconsin Badgers and Texas Longhorns and all these great teams, has these great talents at the top of the game that girls want to emulate. That's a real thing in our state. You all probably know adolescent girls who emulate the girls on our Badger team. That plays out in Nebraska, that plays out in Texas, and all these places. Another indicator that we heard a lot about from some of our coaches that we call the BTN effect, which is that the game of basketball, and Brittany actually was the one who really went this a lot with us, was that she said as a young girl, she grew up, with always seeing basketball on TV and never had seen, but volleyball was never on TV. It literally was not on TV. And so it was like a foreign sport to her. She never had seen, didn't know the rules or anything. So she became a basketball player. This is one simple story, but that effect has played out in a lot of ways. When you really think about prior to BTN really foregrounding the women's volleyball game, a lot of girls just never saw it. And it was a game they played in gym class or PE class. But that's an effect that goes along with all these other things that just now we see on these huge numbers on ESPN and on some of the biggest number of games we hear at the Big Ten when we go to these meetings have been some of the games like this year with Nebraska and Wisconsin. It's been some of the biggest TV viewership games ever, and that's affecting a whole generation of young people seeing the game. So it's what we call the momentum effect. And then the other that goes with that is the leader effect, which is that you see Kelly and other coaches who have really been kind of ambassadors for the game. Actively, they see this part of their work is to go out and build the game, building new frontiers of the game actively. A second, yeah.
Kind of in that category, but maybe also a little bit in the access category, or something I'm seeing with a younger child is it's like this popularity thing. So like my daughter has this little group of first grade friends, and one of the parents says, hey, my daughter's gonna do basketball or volleyball or whatever, and then all the kids do it. So it's like it's like this little trend, they all kind of go, it's like they all swim together in the same direction. And I think some of that has to do with access more. Like I sent out the thing for the volleyball, little kids camp. And then all the parents were like, okay, we're gonna sign up. So it's like exposure, but also pumping. I don't even know how to say that. It's like they all kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
So the more that they're doing it, the more that they're gonna do that same thing together.
That's
You're
great
getting bigger
example.
volume.
There's undoubted that momentum, it's like a social momentum as well, not just seeing the game.
Yeah,
It's what it is.
we kids are watching sports on
Yeah.
TV.
Yeah,
Yeah, not very much anyway.
yeah, that's a great example. Thank you. All of these kind of fit together in some ways, but this one is about choice. So we know from a lot of data at different sports at different levels about the specialization, and we know that it's happening at younger levels. it's a weird thing because we all know intuitively that multi-sport participation is a healthy thing. We know it's good for kids to play multiple sports, but most of us probably did. But kids are giving up sports at younger ages now. And we have some of that SFIA data and I'm trying to remember all my acronyms. NFHS data both indicate that kids are on average, whereas kids used to average like 2.1 sports per kid, it's now the number dipped below, it's like 1.7 or something. So they're playing less sports. And we'll say that as core participation. Core participation means you're on a team or you're pursuing it diligently. So they're playing less. And then along with that, another part of that we call the term is partner sports. So if later grew up playing baseball, and the SFIA report shows like if you play baseball, what is most likely your second sport, and what is most likely your third sport? So it's a very interesting called your partner sports. So like if kids who play golf, there's a very high coupling of tennis. They're like it's like country club sports. They tend to play both. They get lessons at both. It's very tightly coupled. Traditionally, basketball and volleyball for girls, if a girl plays volleyball as they identify as her primary sport, her number one partner sport has been basketball historically. Not surprising, just because of the physical profile. If you're tall, or if you're, there's court sports or that kind of thing. So traditionally, a girl would play fall volleyball at her high school, then she would move on and play in the winter basketball. Well, as this whole movement towards specialization has been this downward trend where now instead of like Morgan making the decision when she's a junior, I can't really play softball and volleyball anymore. Now they're making a decision like in 7th grade. And so the choice for a lot of them becomes a one-on-one decision, basketball or volleyball, which one? And volleyball is winning that. Volleyball is decisively winning that. And this is really one of the biggest factors. Club volleyball starts when? Like the day after high school volleyball, it starts, they finish the state and then they go right into the club. So it's difficult to do both. All right, hypothesis 3, access. We talked about that a little bit, but this is an interesting one as well that we learned a lot from Kelly and the others and some of the other coaches we talked about, which is if we were talking about AAU a little bit, AAU basketball is a real mess. It's a complete mess in many ways at all levels, but it's disorganized, it's dysfunctional. There's not any kind of clear system or trajectory. Even the name AAU basketball right now is almost like it's meaningless because what it's become is a circuit game. There's like the Nike circuit, there's the Under Armour circuit, there's the Adidas circuit. Those are like the main ones. There's some other circuits. To say AAU is kind of meaningless. They're like if you're in the EYBL, it's like that's a great circuit, or the Adidas circuit. Volleyball is much better organized in all of this, and there's a much clearer pathway and clearer trajectory, and not that it's perfect. And so we learned a lot about that the last couple of weeks, but definitely imperfect, but it has a great advantage over basketball in that regard. So people can at a young age kind of know what they're getting to a little bit better than they can in basketball. The other thing that to see with all of this is, we'll get into the next. We'll get into the next that relates to this. 4th hypothesis is coaching and culture. The thing we said about one of the most challenging parts about basketball and football both share this, which they're called what do you call it when someone thinks they know what they're talking about from like this armchair quarterbacks. Like everybody thinks they'll watch the Super Bowl on Sunday. Everybody, because they have watched so much football in their lives, like that was a stupid call. Like what's wrong with Shanahan? Like why would he do that? Because we've been watching football since we were 3, and we all think we know better than the coach. In basketball is the same. What's wrong with Doc Rivers? Like why do we hire him? He stinks. Like that. We all think we know it because this is a gross generalization, but they're very public sports. And there's that aspect. So that trickles into coaching where you see every parent in the bleachers thinks they know better than their kid's coach about playing time, about what kind of offense to run. I mean, I complain about coaches every night with my wife, we do, because we think we know better, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's a normal thing, Volleyball, a lot of parents don't know it as well, is one thing. Again, a gross generalization. However, like I do not know the rules of volleyball very well. It's not a sport that I have followed super closely. I would not, if I were to go try to coach it, I would need to go sit down with Kelly for a couple afternoons and give me the basics or somebody. So he actually mentioned that to us, so that's a real thing, that most youth volleyball coaches, if they go work for a thing, they have to actually get some training about the rules of the game, the etiquette of the game, all these things. And some of this plays out in environments. We've done observations, taking part in a lot of these, and you walk into, for example, a large AAU basketball tournament. And I think Lindsay is on here, and she would tell you that's one of the most stressful experiences, you know, that any parent could have, because there's fights, there's people screaming at each other, there's kids getting mad, it's a very kind of like combustible setting. And not that volleyball is perfect, it is not. There are problems in volleyball at all, but Kelly talks about walking into and the other coaches, into a volleyball big, huge tournament. It's very intense, great level competition. But he said in all those years, he's never seen a fight. He's never seen like police escorting people off of court, which we see every weekend at AU tournaments. So there's a whole kind of, there is definitely like an aspect. It's not just the coaching novice thing, but there's an aspect of the public nature of people think they know better about basketball than they maybe do about volleyball. And that affects the kids, it affects the girls, it affects everybody, the parents, and all that. So it's an interesting thing that we're actually interested to learn more about as we continue to study these things in the years ahead. All that leads to, in some ways, also a more comfortable decision. If I've got a 10-year-old and I go observe one setting and I go observe the other setting, I would rather be over here where there's not fights and there's not all this other stuff happening.
Funny that you say that, because I played basketball in college and work volleyball, and that's the intentional choice. I don't want to work basketball for many of these reasons. The culture is different, and I really like the volleyball culture. It's much more like home. And I mean, I've seen it as a player and as an athletic trainer too.
Yeah, interesting.
Do you think that has something to do with like the nature of the sport too? 'Cause
Yeah,
basketball is
absolutely.
Way more physical and.
That's
you're
very
actually
much it.
touching them versus
That's actually, I
focusing.
meant to say that, Morgan, because an aspect also of basketball is that I didn't even mention officials. So like here's an official right here, who's a very good official. Like I would want him being the official of the basketball game, but there's a lot of poor officials, like a poor official in a volleyball game, maybe they mess up the score and stuff, or they get some line calls wrong, but a poor official in basketball gets your kid a concussion or gets a broken leg because they don't know how to keep control of the game. I remember coaches or officials over the years who would never call a jump ball quick enough. So you get kids just swinging each other and little ones getting thrown in the air by big ones. And it is a very physical game. And if you're 10 years old and you're not prone to wanting aggression, volleyball is an easier entry. So that's a big point. Okay. The last hypothesis is that this is related to the population stuff. And this is more about volleyball growth than it is from, we already talked about this. It's more about volleyball growth than about basketball diminishing. And one thing that we see is, I've used this example a lot, but it's the Jamaican sprinter example that we're gonna see in Texas. This is the secret that Texas has in its favor. And Florida. Florida's getting huge population growth, which is, there's two ways to think about some of this. One is just like sheer more numbers will lead to more players, right? This is just by math of it. If Texas has 66,000 girls playing volleyball, the odds that there'll be some really elite ones is much greater than if they have 40. So that's like the numbers argument for why Texas will explode. Then there's the talent capitalization one, which is that if you think for an example about Wanakee football, and we've talked about this in our class sometime. So Wanakee, there you lived there or have familiarity with it at all? And think about Wanakee football. What do you know about it? Anything?
I lost Banana Grove.
No, they didn't.
Freshman.
Okay. There's no way I was gonna say that didn't happen.
It's that
Yeah, they're really good.
What?
It's affluent community.
Oh, yeah, okay, so it's got affluence. It also had an amazing coach for like the last 25 years, Pat Rice, a great coach, a great coach. Affluence, a great coach, great facilities, families with resources. And so what you've seen there is that, are there necessarily more good athletes in Wanakee than there are in any other community the same size in Wisconsin? Probably not. but you have those other things. And so Wanakee football has probably not missed any great talents over the last 15 years. Everyone who's had great football potential there has gotten their chance. Think now about a similar sized school in Milwaukee right now. Move sports are floundering in Milwaukee, and we're missing 90% of the great athletes because they don't have those things. They don't have the resources or the opportunities. The Jamaican sprinter example is that every 4 years, we'll see it this summer, you'll be like, why are there all these Jamaican sprinters getting like gold medals? This is tiny little country. Like, why is that? And the main argument for that, if you read about all the research, is talent capitalization. When they're in kindergarten in Jamaica, sprinting is on the public school curriculum. So they do in PE. Every single child learns how to run. And then they start identifying the promising ones as they're moving forward. So literally you're not missing every kid going to school and every kid being taught, whether they're any physical profile or not. There's not a need to go to a club or any of that. They're capitalizing on 100% or not 98% of their talent. So one thing that affluent communities do way better than low socioeconomic communities is capitalize on talent. And that's not because of the choice of the kid, it's because of the opportunities of the kid. So in Texas, what we're going to see is affluent communities that are successful at capitalization as well as the numbers. So it's like the double whammy for us. But it's the really good thing for them. So that's a little bit of a thing to look for in these years ahead. Okay, so that's it. What do you think about those hypotheses or?
So I just had a thought, is there any data to support maybe that because of the growing popularity of volleyball, that it's an easier sport to make a name for yourself? So that's maybe why some basketball stars are switching to volleyball. Like, for example, when I played football and baseball, it was a lot easier for me to make a name for myself for scouts playing football than baseball. Whether it's scouts from high school to college or scouts from college to college.
That's good. I am, you know, you know the NIL stuff better, but that's such a recent development. Some of the ability to like monetize some of this, because traditionally, neither of those games, women's basketball or because even right now, I was reading yesterday about a WNBA player who's Elena Deladon or Bella. She stepped away from the game. They're like, she could have signed a supermax contract, which would have been like $175,000, which is a lot of money. But it's like, I'm used to reading NBA, you know, things where they signed $175 million. So for women's sports, historically and traditionally, they've not had the monetary aspect. But now with NIL the last couple of years, I don't know how that's changed. I mean, clearly it's worked out well for the very elite team.
Well, like I got 2 scholarship offers for football, but I couldn't get one when I was playing baseball.
Oh, that's an interesting thing, is that right now, if you were smart and you wanted to get your daughter a talent scholarship, put her into women's basketball, girls basketball. They allow more scholarships right now. They get 15. How many do you get? 12? 13? 14? 12? So there are less scholarships in women's volleyball than in women's basketball. And there's like way more players. So I would tell my daughter, go play basketball.
What do the injury rates look like between women's basketball and volleyball?
We have those, well, I'll say, leading to that point, Kevin, which is somewhere buried in here, we have another reason for leaving sport. And the 3 biggest reasons are burnout, poor coaching, and injury. And basketball has a higher rate of all 3 of those than volleyball, historically. I have not seen the comparative like volleyball numbers. Do you have a sense for that?
No, I'm just thinking like, you know, maybe it's easier to get a scholarship to play Division I women's basketball
Yeah.
than it is as to play Division I women's volleyball. And if your goal is to get a scholarship, sure, but you better have $60,000 set aside for ACL.
Yeah.
You know, and you better have your healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just think about like the volleyball, I think about this a lot in the sense of like volleyball is one of the only team sports where you're not in direct competition with your opposition. Outside maybe like doubles tennis, right? So it's a much safer sport for
Yeah.
participation.
Yeah.
I think you highlight some.
Yeah.
I can piggyback on Kevin's too, as I just, saw some data on overuse injuries in volleyball. And they're showing that the overuse numbers are being quantified better now in some of the surveys that have gone around just in our state. But it's hard to really flesh out what, like, define for young players what an overuse injury is. They don't really get it. They just go, oh yeah, it hurts. I can just play through it. But there's starting to be more awareness about that. And I think in the future, we're gonna see that overuse injuries are gonna, be more observed or at least more discussed.
We saw it with the TCU women's team a couple weeks ago. The TCU was like a top 25 women's basketball team, and they had to cancel 3 games because they didn't have enough players.
You brought up volleyball.
They had open tryouts. They had open tryouts.
One other thing that I hear in my experience when I talk to the players over the years who have been multi-sport athletes, but who have specialized in volleyball, is that they didn't like the contact aspect of basketball. They just did not want to go through that physicality all the time. And I don't know if that's a statement to our younger populations now, like from a psychological standpoint, or if it's, just personal choice or what it is, but that's definitely been the consistent messaging that I've heard of why they would choose volleyball over basketball.
That makes me
Those
think
are-
too, like waist sports too, like, and I mean, have to look more closely, but like football numbers are down, wrestling numbers, like those more like
Yeah.
deeply physical,
Mhm.
like, those numbers are down, so like,
So you just
what's
wonder if
going on
this is sort
there?
of our youth mentality now is changing.
Or it makes me wonder too, I mean, I have no evidence or whatever, I just wonder like, so is there something going on in the country, right? That's just like, historically, right, like there's this like toxic masculinity to solve problems. And is there something shifting that's saying, you know what, like, we can actually solve a problem without punching each other in the face?
On the football field. Yeah.
Or like cracking skulls sort of thing, right? And it's just like, well, we can still compete, right? But we can compete in a way that doesn't, I don't know, is there something in the wider?
We'll get into this a little bit next time, but another aspect of this is jumps out at you when you look at who plays these sports. So the football is among all the sports, it's toward the very bottom of terms of average socioeconomic status. So some of what we're seeing is that kids from affluence their participation is not dropping. If you come from if you live in the Arrowhead School District, their numbers I just keep using that because my friend there is a great coach there. They have great athletic programs. Their numbers are not dropping, but in 15 miles to the east, they are dropping rapidly. A lot of that is the story being told all around the country in the sports that traditionally most lower socioeconomic status, most students of color are playing in football and basketball. The football has by far the most kids in a sport in the country. You think of every high school by far. So that's another aspect of it. It's a demographic story. Kids from low income situations are playing less sports.
Well, because even to play high school sports, like high school football, high school cover uniform, then we'd have to pay $900 more, or more than that to participate. So I can see where that would certainly affect participation. I'm sure that's true a lot of places.
Yeah.
That's not even club, that's just play high school.
Well, that's why I asked about if there was a trend more towards having to pay to play in high school, because where I'm from, I was from a smaller town and there was a town really close by that was larger, more affluent, and you had to play to participate, so that cut out half of their student body for participating. And then on top of that, they were very selective, so it wasn't that kids were choosing to specialize, it was they had to or you don't make the team. So for volleyball specifically, those girls were doing nothing else, because the only way that you made that team was if you played year round and you could afford to play. So that was why my question was like, is there a trend that high schools are across the board moving towards not covering the costs of their students playing and forcing parents and families to foot the bill? And if that was.
That's something that we should learn more about. My understanding is that at most schools, when there's a box, like we can't pay this fee, and that most schools do cover that fee. If there is the $900 thing.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I think where I saw it affect some of my son's friends was like, do they have a right to practice?
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't live near the high school and you know, so they'd start off freshman, sophomore, you know, they
Yeah.
coach rights and, but maybe by their junior, you know, they're just,
And for a lot of them, that
It's just
started
done.
before they ever got to high school, so.
What's that?
For a lot of them, that happened before they ever got to
Right,
high school, so
right.
they weren't able to get a ride to
Right.
seventh grade practice, and they didn't
Right.
play in eighth grade, and then
Right.
they're not playing.
I think something else we're seeing too with the club, with the mega club involvement is that, kids are starting the clubs in any sport really at younger ages. And if they don't stay with it, they lose their spot and they get bumped, and then they don't get to continue in the same trajectory as the rest of their teammates. And so if you choose to be a multi-sport athlete, because it's good for you and good for your body and good for your mind, then you lose your spot with whatever sport you thought you wanted to specialize in. And so then parents and kids are saying, well, shoot, I guess I can't do that because I will lose my spot in, you know, my elite level soccer team or whatever it is. And so I think some of that is we got to figure out how to change the mentality and the expectation and like really celebrate multi-sport participation.
You set me up perfectly for my final remark, which is next time, so it's like, some of this is the so what, so like, whoa, that's interesting, but then like, well, so what does it mean? And so some of it, we got a little grant in BIOS this year to study, I keep mentioning Arrowhead, but there's a program there called Let Kids Fly, the coach's name is Jeff Staus, S-T-A-U-S. And the first time I ever saw it was when one of our kids was playing for the 56ers, one of these pay-for-play teams, and we were some other place, and they were playing this team called Let Kids Fly. Like, what is that? I looked at the website. This is a number of years ago, and it's this, and it said, you know, and these tenets are like all kids should play should be free, play should be fun, play should be healthy, kids should play multiple sports. And I was like, wow. And we started studying it and met them, spent time with them. And Jeff he's the boys soccer coach at Arrowhead High School. And he started this nonprofit in which he went from like 30 kids to 70 kids to hundreds of kids. So now he's got this program in partnership with the Arrowhead School District where they've used the school grounds to club team from levels of like recreational level to like pretty high level club team, playing for very low cost, encouraging multi-sport, no penalty for doing other sports. It's an amazing model. So like that, we're studying that this year about how can we ramp up that type of thing. And then also we want to learn about, what does this mean, these demographic changes and these number of changes? What does it mean for us here? Like when we're looking for talent, we're looking to build our teams. Are there implications? There clearly are, that we, you know, there was a Coach Alvarez had the great thing about building a wall around the state, but what happens when the state is empty? You know, and how does that play out in the future? Not that the state's empty, but how do you think in new ways about recruiting when you know who's playing what games is rapidly changing? If you keep doing the same thing, it's not as good now as it was 20 years ago. So thank you for coming. I love any ideas that we didn't get a chance to hear, but if you have ideas that we missed, please let us know. Right down the hall, the third swing. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank you.